Okay, good morning, everybody. Thank you all so much for joining us for our final session of our Reading in the Age of Distraction series. And today we have Read to See. My name is Patty, and I will be your host for today. Today's session is the final part of Reading in the Age of Distraction, a series of conversations with acclaimed local and international thinkers on the science of reading and reading well in the digital age. Over the last 3 Saturdays, we've heard from experts as they discussed the art of focus reading and learned how to become better readers in the traditional sense. In today's session, we'll be learning how we can become better readers of the world around us. So before we start the session, just some quick house rules. As this is a webinar, all participants are automatically muted. You're welcome to interact with other participants and our speaker for today in the chat box. If you have a question, you can type them in the Q&A panel, the question and answer panel. We'll try our best to answer as many questions, but do note we might not be able to catch every single one of them due to time constraints, but we'll try our best, yeah? And also please note that this session is recorded. So today in Read to See, you will learn how you can hone your skills of visual perception through art to better read people, places, and situations. Let me just give a quick introduction of our speaker today. Amy Herman is a lawyer and art historian who uses works of art to sharpen observation, analysis, and communication skills. She developed the Art of Perception, a program which she has used to train a wide range of professionals, including the New York City Police Department, the FBI, the State Department, Fortune 500 companies, NATO, and the military. So without further ado, everyone, let me introduce Amy Herman, who will take us through today's session. Over to you, Amy.
Thank you so much, Patty. Thank you for that lovely introduction. And I am really thrilled to be here with all of you. I want to wish you all a good day. It is dark here in New York City, as you can see, but I'm really thrilled to be here. So I'm going to share my screen with you because it's so much more fun to look at works of art than it is to look at my picture. Whoops. Let me just stop the share. Hold on one second. Let me try that again. I'm going to share it. And I'm going to go from the beginning. Oh, it's not working for me. So I'm just going to scroll back to the. All right. Can we see the slides? Can everybody see my slides? Somebody can just type a quick yes in the chat room. Excellent. Excellent. I'm so glad you can see the slides. Well, thank you again to Ilyani and to Patty for that introduction. I'm really so happy to be here. So I have a few good rules for all of my sessions that I conduct virtually. And the first rule is that you don't have to write anything down that I say. I have already made a digital summary of my presentation. So if anybody would like a summary of what I've said, you can just send me an email. I put my contact information up at the end and you can feel free to reach out and I can give you a digital summary. The second rule is I hope you'll take part in the conversation. I hope you'll have lots of questions. I would love to hear your insights and your observations. And the third rule that I have for all of my sessions is that for the next hour, 90 minutes that we're together, for the remainder of your day and the rest of the week, I ask my participants to refrain from using 2 words, obviously and clearly. And when I deliver my presentation in person, if anybody breaks that rule, I ask everyone to applaud. And the reason I do that is, why would I ask you to refrain from using 2 such commonly used words as obviously and clearly? It's because we live and work and read in a very complex world. Nothing is obvious and even less is clear. And so rather than saying, well, obviously it's a case of X, I prefer that people say, it appears to me to be a case of X because of Y and Z. So those are my rules. They're very easy. No note taking, take part in the conversation, no obviously and no clearly. As I was thinking about the first image that I wanted to use to capture your imagination and start thinking about how do we read the world around us? How do we shift our perspective? I chose this painting by the South African artist Philip Barlow. And if your instinct is to take off your glasses or to rub your eyes to bring this painting into focus, it's doing its job. It's purposefully painted this way. And I think that it is a compelling reminder to all of us that we need to bring the world into focus multiple times a day, not just in the morning over a cup of tea or in the evening as we collect our thoughts, but all day long, we need to bring the world into focus. And that's very hard to do in an age of distraction. But I hope that this presentation today will give you some of the tools to help bring that world into focus, whether it's the world we're reading about or the world that we are living in or the world that we are working in. So the next slide is an image that doesn't really need any explanation, but I'm going to talk about it anyway. This is the coronavirus. This is a picture of the COVID virus. And the reason I show it to you is because a good friend of mine studies elephants. And I learned all about elephants from him. But I've learned that the most important elephant is the elephant in the room. And we need to talk about the elephant in the room. And that's what the coronavirus is. We need to stop camouflaging the toll that this virus has taken on our lives, on every aspect of our lives. COVID has upended our lives personally, professionally, individually, collectively, intellectually, socially, economically. And to steal a line from Winston Churchill, he said, "Never let a good crisis go to waste." And I really believe this. I believe that we can take this time that we've spent during this pandemic to rethink how we see things. How do we overcome distractions? How do we see the world around us in a more effective way? And I like to think that we can take this opportunity to clean the lenses on our eyes and on our glasses to see differently. And I also believe we're not out of the woods yet. You know, we were just talking about how people are starting to travel again, but whatever we return to, it's never going to be the same normal that it was 2.5 years ago. But I hope that we can come out of this thriving instead of just surviving. And I think that that takes an effort for us to step back and think about how we see things and how we are processing distractions in our world. Because this is what's happened to our world. I've just come back from 12 days in Europe, and I've been all over the United States. And when they say global pandemic, they mean global pandemic. Everywhere in the world has been literally and figuratively turned upside down. And as I said, this has given us an opportunity to think about how we see the world, how we engage in the world, and how we think about the distractions that are new, because we've had all new distractions. It's a whole new world in pandemic. Why do we even have to think about this? It's because this, what I'm showing you, is not an option for any of us. And what is this? This is what they call a deer in the headlights. What I've learned in the last 2.5 years is you can find any image on the internet if you look hard enough. And I found a deer in the headlights. A deer in the headlights means you don't know what to do. You're paralyzed by a situation. And 2.5 years ago, I took one of the last flights in from Rome, and then my world stopped. I couldn't travel anymore. I couldn't deliver presentations on the art of perception anymore. And I had to rethink what my world was going to look like. And part of that was getting through the distractions in my world. How do I pivot if I can't take a clear look at what's happening around me? And there are a couple of things that I've brought with me over the last 2.5 years that I want to share with you that I think will help us not only get through this pandemic, but other distractions and other situations that are in the future, because none of us can see around corners. And the first thing that I've brought with me that I think is key to thinking about our world in terms of distractions is to remember to pause, to stop, to look, and to listen. And when you look at the slide that I've put up on the screen, if you pause long enough, you will see that the horses are actually standing still and the water is moving. That's not the way it's supposed to be. The horses are supposed to be moving, but they're not. And, you know, before the pandemic, we were so busy running from point A to point B that we never stopped to pause to see if anything was broken. We never paused long enough to see if there might be a better way to do something. And now I think that we've had this forced pause during the pandemic, and we need to incorporate a pause into our day, every day, into our world, to just think about what it is that we're seeing. And the journalist Frank Bruni wrote a beautiful piece about the power of a pause. And this is what he said: a pause is when passions cool, civility gets oxygen, and wisdom finds its wings. Passions cool, civility gets oxygen, and wisdom finds its wings. We all need to start by pausing every day, finding time to pause to think about what it is that we are seeing. The second concept that I've brought with me through the pandemic that helps me to reconcile in this new world is to think about the big picture and small details and make sure that we realize that they are equally important. I'm showing you a work of art now by the artist Joana Vasconcelos. She's from Portugal, and Joana Vasconcelos is a very tall woman, and she makes tall, big sculptures. And when I saw this big, beautiful sculpture at the Guggenheim in Bilbao back in 2018, I walked into the gallery and it was so big, but I was so taken with those mirrors. The artist made each of those mirrors and she welded them and she soldered them together. And I was so taken with her craftsmanship and her being an artisan that I went right in for the mirrors, and I looked at my hair and I looked at my lipstick, and I never stepped back to see that the mirrors together make up an eye mask like they wear in Venice. Now, is there any harm in my not seeing the big picture? Not in this case, other than feeling kind of silly when a year later I saw a catalog of her work and I saw this piece of art and I thought, oh, that's what that was. It's a mask. But for some of the people with whom I work, I think it's dangerous not to see the big picture. So the pandemic has given us a time to rethink small details and the big picture. What are our overarching goals? What are our aspirations? Because when we get so tangled in the weeds and so focused on what we're doing, we forget about the big picture. And I think that that's dangerous. And by rethinking our distractions, we can bring the big picture back into focus. And the third concept that I've brought with me through the pandemic that has helped me to really drown out some of those distractions is a Latin phrase that I learned from one of my colleagues. And the phrase is festina lente. Festina lente. It means to make haste slowly. And what does it mean to make haste slowly? If you look at this painting that I've put up on the screen, it's called the Biglin Brothers from 1872. And they're in a one-paired rowing boat, and the Biglin Brothers want to win the race. They want to beat the team behind them in red. But if they don't practice festina lente, if they don't slow down to make sure that their oars are in perfect synchronicity, and if they don't slow down to communicate with each other that one of their arms is hurting and the other one has to pick up the slack, everything falls apart. So we need to think about slowing down to actually speed up. When we slow down, we can communicate with each other. We can make sure that we're all on the same page. So I want to give you a visual illustration of my presentation tonight, what I hope to do with you tonight in the art of perception. So I want you to think of the work that you do, and you all do different kinds of work, like this barn. This is a barn that is in Southeast Michigan here in the United States. And the owner of the barn was worried about its future. She was worried about the extreme climate situation. She was worried about what would happen if the barn became abandoned. So she invited a team of architects in to come help her fix the barn. And the architects were named Katie Newell and her team. And Katie Newell came to Michigan and came to look at the barn. And the first thing she and her team did was to go inside the barn to get a sense of its strengths and its weaknesses and what its infrastructure looked like. And then Katie and her team called the project, they named it the Secret Sky. And what they did is they removed a perfect angle from foundation to roof to let the light in a different way. And this was the result of their project. You can see that not only did they strengthen the barn by cutting a piece out, but they married the barn to the landscape in a very different way. You can see the land and the light coming through the barn in a way that wasn't possible before. And what I thought was so interesting is they didn't just think about the barn looking east to west in one dimension. They thought about the barn at sunrise and at sunset and during bad weather. And I thought most ingeniously, they filled the barn with solar powered lights. So at night, they could illuminate the inside of the barn so people could see it in a way that they never could before. This is what I want to do with you today. I want to take a small slice out of your morning today to let light in so you can see the work that you do and the lives that you're living in a different way. Maybe you can see your distractions differently. Maybe you can minimize those distractions and refocus and rethink how we look at things. So I'm going to ask you now all to please raise your hand, your right hand in the air, and look at the slide that I've put on the screen. Everyone raise your right hand. And I want you to look at this at the screen, and you can only put your hand down if you see something absolutely definitive in this slide that you could describe to somebody who wasn't looking at it. If you see something definitive, you can put your hand down. Now, if your hand is still up, I'm going to tell you that there's a mammal in this slide. If you see a mammal, definitively, you can put your hand down. Now, if your hand is still up in the air, I'm going to tell you that this mammal has 4 legs. If you see a 4-legged mammal, you can put your hand down. Now you can all put your hands down. And no, it's not a cat. I know a lot of you see a cat. I'm going to show you an overexposed version of this photograph, and I'm going to show you what you were looking at. You were looking at a cow. Now let's go back to the original photograph. You can't unsee the cow that I've just shown you. Now, this is not an optical illusion. This is not one of those things, do you see an old lady or a goat? This is a real photograph, and it's called the Renshaw cow. And it was developed by a man named Dr. Samuel Renshaw in World War II to help Navy pilots see enemy warfare faster. But that's not why I show it to you. I show it to you because about 10 years ago, a man came to New York City to speak, and his name was Apollo Robbins. And Apollo Robbins used to be a professional thief, a professional con man, but now he works on the right side of the law, as do I. And I had read about him and heard about him, but I never saw him live. So I grabbed a friend of mine and I said, come on, we're going to see Apollo Robbins speak. Well, there was Apollo at the door, shaking all of our hands. Hello, hello, and greeting us. And do you know, when I got to my seat, my bracelet around my wrist was gone. And Apollo Robbins managed to take my bracelet off just by shaking my hand. So when I got my bracelet back, I decided to listen to what he had to say, and he began with this slide. And he put it up and he asked us to do what I asked you to do, to raise your right hand in the air and put it down when you see something definitive. Well, my friend sitting next to me put her hand down right away. And I was looking and I was thinking, is that a cat? Is that a flying platypus? I didn't know what I was looking at. And to make matters worse, my friend said, I can't believe you don't see this. So I begin our session tonight with the premise that no two people see anything the same way. And we need to remember that as we're looking at the world around us, and remembering that nobody sees the world the same way we do, through our eyes attached to our brain. And next time you're tempted to say to someone, I can't believe you don't see this, think again. Think again. So how do I do this? How do I use works of art to get people to rethink how they read the world around them and how to help them drown out the distractions that are preventing them to see what matters? I'm showing you a painting now from 1597 by the artist Giuseppe Arcimbaldo. You don't have to worry about artist names or dates. You don't have to write them down. What is it? It's a black bowl with some onions and some leeks and some turnips and greens. It's a lovely painting. But the real power of the painting is revealed when you turn it upside down. And you can see it becomes the title, The Vegetable Gardener. Do you all see the hat and the cheeks and the nose and the eyes? So what this reminds me of is what the late Dr. Wayne Dyer said. He said, change the way you look at things and the things you look at change. I'm going to say that again. Change the way you look at things and the things you look at change. This is what I do. Yes, it is the Renshaw cow. Yes, thank you. This is what I do. I help leaders around the world change the way they look at things. Sometimes we flip paintings upside down. Sometimes we rethink how we're looking at things to help them do their work more effectively. And by way of introduction, to follow up on Patty's lovely introduction, I am a recovering lawyer and an art historian. And I like to think that I combine the practical aspects of each of those disciplines, legal analysis and visual analysis, to create this program that I designed 21 years ago. I wrote Visual Intelligence in 2016, but I've been teaching the program since 2001. The program started for medical students here in New York City. And the program was not my idea. They were doing the program at Yale, and with Yale's very gracious permission, I started it at the Frick Collection, which is a museum that I worked at here in New York City. And after about 3 or 4 years of doing the program, I realized that it had greater applicability than just for medical students. And one of my friends suggested that I do this for police officers. So I picked up the phone and I called the New York City Police Department. And I explained to them that I teach medical students to look at works of art to enhance their observation skills, and that I thought it would be great for police officers. Well, the picture that you see of me in the top center is teaching my first group of police officers here in New York City. And that picture was taken at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And that collaboration of teaching police officers it made it to the front page of the Wall Street Journal in 2005. And after that, my world exploded. I got calls from all over the world, and they all asked the same thing. They all said, can you come teach us like you did those police officers in New York City? Well, I can't teach anybody how to see, but what I can do, and what I'm going to do with you this evening, is my very simple methodology for thinking about how we can better focus on what we see. And it's called 4 A's. Every new problem, every new situation, any new situation that we are encountering, we practice 4 A's. First, we assess our situation. We say, what do we have in front of us? 2, you analyze it. You say, what's important? What do I need? What do I get rid of? What do I prioritize? Number 3, you articulate it. You tell someone. You send an email, you send a text. And 4th, you act, you make a decision. You assess, you analyze, you articulate, and you act 100 times a day. But we forget how intertwined observation and perception are with those 4 A's. So after the article appeared in the Wall Street Journal about my working with New York City police officers, I left my job at the Frick Collection, and I now travel the world. It is my honor and privilege to do this program all over the world with 13 divisions of the New York City Police Department. I work with the FBI, I work with NATO, I work with the French National Police. I've written my 3 books, I've done a TED Talk. I don't need to tell you all that. Why do I even tell you? Because I have a very unique lens across the professional spectrum. ACT is the last 4A, assess, analyze, articulate, and act. And I've been doing this all over the world. And I realize that if you are in my session, you already have good, if not extraordinary, observation and perception skills. That's not the problem. The problem, as I perceive it, is in the consistent breakdown of the effective communication of what it is that we see. Something gets lost from what we see to what we say to what we type and what we text. And I don't know what it is that's getting lost. So I'm using art to fill the gap. And for some reason, it seems to be working. And I have three goals for you tonight. The first, or today, I should say, it's tonight for me. The first goal is that I want each of you to leave here thinking differently about one aspect of the work that you do or the world you live in. Number two, I want to help you convert observable details into actionable knowledge. How can you better act based on what you see? And number three, I want to help fix what's broken. I want to clean your lenses to help you see not only problems differently, but some of the resources that you may have to solve those problems with better solutions. And to quote Henry James, the really overarching goal of this whole presentation is try to be the person on whom nothing is lost. So that's how I got here, and that's what we're going to be doing. Why art? Because art gives us the opportunity from the chaos of a 17th century painting on the left to the simplicity of a 21st century painting on the right, and everything in between, to step away from our world, look through a different lens at something else, so that when we come back, we'll see things more perceptively. But this is not an art class. This is not Picasso versus Pollock. But in case you're wondering, it's Pollock on the left, Picasso on the right. This is about changing your visual data. This is about giving your left brain a rest, engaging your right brain, so that when you go back to your left brain and you think about data and numbers and analytics, my hope is that you'll see things more perceptively. And I was just in Venice recently, and to show you that art can bring a whole new perspective to how we look at things, I'm showing you the Accademia building from the 18th century. It was built in the 1700s in Venice. And here in the center, Anish Kapoor put a sculpture of a mirror that reflects the sky. Here in this 18th century building, let's put something new and look up to see new things. We need to hold a mirror up to our work and to hold a mirror up to our lives to see new things and better solutions. But to do all this with me tonight, you need to shift your perspective. Why? Because most of the people that I work with don't look at art for a living, and I'm sure many of you don't necessarily look at art every day. I want you to shift your perspective like this artist. His name is JR. JR is what they call a photographer. He takes pictures of people and he blows them up to billboard size, and he puts them all over the world on sidewalks and runways and tops of buildings. But early in his career, he had a problem. He never got a permit to do any of this. And some countries didn't like it, and they issued warrants for his arrest. And while those warrants were pending, he was commissioned to do this portrait. And I think it's brilliant. It's called Self-Portrait in a Woman's Eye, Kenya, 2009. Why do I think it's brilliant? Because he shifted his perspective on what self-portraiture is, and he took a picture of himself and you don't know what he looks like. Why? Because if you knew what he looked like, it would be easier to get arrested, and who wants to get arrested? But I'm going to make the assumption that none of you are trying to evade arrest. So why do we need to shift our perspective? We need to shift our perspective to understand how we can go from looking at just a small detail to a very big picture. And some of you may recognize the photograph that I've put up on the screen, the towers of Notre Dame burning. It was a terrible thing that happened in 2019. This picture went viral. But to really understand a problem, we need to step back from just one small detail and see the big picture. We need to take a deliberate step back to put parameters around the problem. We need to understand the scope and the breadth of the damage before we can think about solutions. How do we do this? How do we think about shifting our perspective and looking differently at the world? We have to look in the mirror. And I'm showing you 6 different self-portraits. And the idea about self-portraiture that I love is that each of these artists has looked in the mirror. And I don't care how often you look in the mirror, but make sure that you look in the mirror with your eyes wide open. Because if you do what the artist in the center did, I don't know how Villard painted his picture with his eyes closed, but I don't recommend it. I think it's cheating. I think you're looking at yourself with your eyes closed. And if your eyes are closed, you might miss this. Well, what is that? Umbrellas in the garbage can. That's my umbrella on the left. In New York City, we have these men, or mostly men, that are selling umbrellas on the sidewalk as soon as it starts to rain. And since I never have an umbrella, I always buy one, and without fail, it falls apart in the first rainstorm. So when I threw my umbrella away, I felt silly for throwing umbrellas away, but look how many other umbrellas were thrown away on that particular day. It wasn't just me. But the artist Jean Shin had a different idea. She walked around New York City and she pulled all these failed umbrellas out of the garbage can, and she took out the handles and the infrastructure, and look what she did with the fabric. She made this beautiful sculpture, and I think it's ironic that failed umbrellas are successful at shielding you from the sun. Now, I know that none of you are running around in Singapore pulling failed umbrellas out of the garbage can, but my question for you is, how do you see potential in things, in people, in ideas, in approaches, in practice? And more importantly, how do you communicate how you see that potential? Because when I work with people, I work with CEOs, and people say, oh, you're so lucky, they're so brilliant. But I have news: if you can't communicate your vision or your strategy, you're really not that brilliant after all. How do we articulate potential that we see? It's like what Magritte did in this painting. He had the artist look at the egg and see the bird. Now, a good friend of mine says, well, when I work with eggs, I end up with yolk on my face. I'm fine with that, because I don't believe that there are any successes without failures. We have to look at failures, and I call it failing forward, thinking about things that don't go the way we're supposed to, and let's take from them what we can and apply it to the next try. So I want to show you another reason to shift our perspective, to understand that sometimes one small change can have a very large impact. I'm showing you the work of a sculptor from Mexico, Jorge Mendez Blake, who decided to build a wall over Kafka's book, El Castillo, all bricks, no mortar. And you can see that as the artist built the wall, the little book disrupted the symmetry of the wall. But as you get to the outer edges of the wall, you can't see the book anymore. But I want to show you the impact of one small paperback book on the entire work of art. It shows you that one new idea, one different approach, one different way of looking at something can have a monumental and immeasurable impact. So sometimes when we shift our perspective and we make small changes, it really can have a very long-lasting impact. So how do we do this? How do we think about looking at art to change the way, not only how we see things, but how we ask questions in the world around us, because that's a way that we engage. So to illustrate this, I'm showing you a work by Kumi Yamashita, and I'm going to show you details. And every time I show you a detail, I want you to think about questions that you would ask about this work of art, like, what is it made of? Who is the subject? How did the artist make this? How long did it take her to make this? And if you ask the right questions, you'll find out that this work of art is made of a wooden board, 10,000 nails, and one unbroken piece of sewing thread. The entire work of art is made of one unbroken piece of sewing thread. And I know what some of you are thinking. Some of you are thinking, that's amazing. And others are thinking, well, so what? What does that have to do with the work that I do? And the answer is everything. But because what unites everyone that I work with is that everyone has to ask questions to get the information they need to do their work. And what I want to help them do, and what I want to help you do today, is think about framing our questions in such a way to get the information that we need to do our jobs. To put the distractions aside and think, what do I need to get from this question? What do I need to learn to be able to do my work? Because we can't ask the same questions of different audiences. So if anyone wants to accuse me of just showing them art, that's not what I'm doing. I'm using art as a vehicle to get us to rethink our sense of critical inquiry. Art is just the vehicle. I'm trying to help the people that I work with and the readers of my book to think about tuning out the distractions to frame their questions in the most specific way possible. So I want to now turn your attention to the subject of the book that I published in December about problem solving. And the idea behind this book is to look at the artist's creative process, to think about how we can adjust our lenses to rethink problems, solutions, and mistakes that we make. And I'm showing you an artwork by Stephen Young Lee. And this is the final work of art. He works in porcelain and ceramics, and the brokenness is part of the final work of art. And so to think about how we can solve problems in a more sustainable way, I want to introduce you to the work of Giorgio Morandi. Morandi is an Italian artist. He was born in Bologna, he died in Bologna, and he maybe left Italy 3 times during his life. And the reason I want to show you Morandi's work is because he painted the same things over and over again. Vases and jars and cups and bowls, vases and jars and cups and bowls. And some people think Morandi's work is just, oh, it's so boring. It's vases and jars and cups and bowls. But I don't see it that way. I see a quiet subtext. I see Morandi's work as really thinking about the interrelationships of things, people to their work, to their things, to people, to a company, to their clients, to their vendors, to the big picture. And Morandi thinks about light and volume and weight and shadow. And so really to solve problems, it's about moving those pieces around. We all do the same things every day, but no 2 days are ever the same. So I want readers of my book and people who take my class to rethink how we move those pieces around to try to solve problems. So to illustrate this, I'm showing you a photograph of Pablo Picasso. What is he doing? He's eating every last piece of fish out of the skeleton. And look at the dog in the background. Even the dog in the background is saying, aren't you going to save me any of that? But look at Picasso's eyes. I can't promise to tell you what I think he's thinking, but I think I know what he's thinking. Picasso is thinking about the skeleton in his hands and how he's going to use that as a subject for his next work of art, how it's going to be a theme in his drawings, how the fish skeleton is going to be a motif in his ceramics, how this resource that's literally at his fingertips can be used to solve a problem of what's going to be the next subject for his artwork. So when we think about how we can use art and how we can look at our resources differently, sometimes we don't need to go any farther than what's at our fingertips or in the room around us or the colleagues in the office with us. How can we look at our resources differently? And the photographer Eric Kogan did that, and he does what I think is so beautiful. He looks for the extraordinary in the ordinary. Look at this picture that he took outside of the cloud that seems to be held by part of the building. But the photographer doesn't just look for the extraordinary in the ordinary looking outward, he also does it looking inward. Look at this extraordinary photograph that he took inside. So it's an idea that when we're looking to solve problems, let's look at the resources that are at our fingertips, both inside our world and outside our world, both in our families and in our working world, with our colleagues and in the greater world around us. And if we can change our lenses, we might find more sustainable and more innovative solutions. So blah, 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 blah. I've been showing you works of art for almost 45 minutes. And I said that I had 3 goals. I wanted to change the way you think about one aspect of your life. I wanted to help you convert observable details into actionable knowledge. And 3, I wanted to help you, give you some tools to fix what's broken by cleaning your lenses and thinking about resources differently. So what are our takeaways? Number 1, things are always going to go wrong. Like, look at this donut. If you own the restaurant and this happens, what do you do with the donut? If someone gave it to me right now, I'd eat it right away. But do we throw the donut away? Do we give it to a child for free? What do we do with the donut that's been crushed? We need to understand the consequences of our observations and convert observable details into actionable knowledge. Number two, we have to realize that we can't fix everything. The artist Glenn Taylor found broken cups and saucers in his mother's attic after she died, and he tried to fix them with barbed wire. But that doesn't really work because that doesn't make for a usable cup and saucer. And yet the artist Tati Freitas on the right from Brazil, she fixes broken furniture with lacquer and acrylic. And it may not be your style, but it makes for functional furniture. So when we're trying to think about what can be fixed, we need to say out loud what can be fixed, what has the potential to be fixed, and we need to recognize what we can't fix, and we need to get it out of the way so it's not a distraction anymore. Let's devote our limited resources to situations where we can make a difference, where we can fix things, and we know we can fix things and get rid of the things that we can't fix. The man who stole my bracelet, Apollo Robbins, has a wonderful saying. He said that we have 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason, and to use them proportionally. We should be listening twice as much as we are talking. Because the author Stephen Covey often says that the majority of us listen to respond instead of listening to understand. And my retort to that is, imagine how responsive we could be if we actually listened to understand. Another thing we need to do as a takeaway is to find common ground. What does that mean? I'm showing you an American painting on the left and an Italian sculptor on the right. You don't need an art degree to see the commonality between them. We live in a very divisive world now. Let's start with what's common between us, and then we can move on to our differences, because it's always easier to solve problems when we start from a common place. This is sort of what the world looks like right now. I think about our world looking like a painting by Julie Meritou. It's chaos, it's controlled chaos, it's paint and pencil and color and architecture. This might not be sustainable, but don't strive for this either. Whatever our new normal looks like after COVID is never going to be the kind of symmetry that we had before COVID. And I think that asymmetry is actually okay and can be quite beautiful. Because one of the takeaways from this presentation that I want my readers to get from the book is, don't let perfection be the enemy of good. Let's change our lenses to see imperfection in a different way and incorporate it into our solutions, so that when we can show imperfection, we can say, well, yes, these are the mistakes we've made, but this is what we've learned from them and how we're going to move forward. One of the things that I heard during the pandemic that I really didn't like, but I heard it all the time was, well, we're all in the same boat. The truth is, we were never in the same boat. The thing about COVID is that we were all in the same storm, but we had different strengths and different weaknesses and different abilities and different things available to us. And now, as that storm begins to abate, we need to say out loud again that we're still not all in the same boat. And we need to recognize what our resources are, what our strengths are, what our weaknesses are, and be able to look with a new lens at those resources. And since we can't see around corners, we need to be better prepared for what's going to happen in the future, whether it be another pandemic or another subvariant or something that happens in our world. We need to be better prepared. The world is still upside down now. There's no question that it's still upside down, but I think we're in a unique place to begin to turn it right side up. And I hope that looking at works of art can help give us a new grounding. But we have to remember that whatever the new normal looks like when we turn our lives and our country and the way we engage with the world back right side up, it's not going to look like it did 2.5 years ago. We have to be able to look at things differently and view our distractions differently, because nothing will ever be the same way that it was. This is probably one of my favorite works of art in this presentation, and I save it for the conclusion. It's by an artist named Jennifer Odom, and it's called Tables Rising. And the artist built 7 tables that are standing sentinel on the banks of the Mississippi River. And that's New Orleans that you see in the background. And it's rising up against adversity and guarding against post-Katrina flood waters. And one of the reasons I find it so beautiful is it's so symbolic. When the Mississippi River floods in New Orleans and it breaks through the levees and floods people's homes, what do they do with their valuables? They put them on the table so they won't get lost in the water. When we can't agree with each other, what do? We try to come to the table. Jennifer Odom's sculpture is a reminder to all of us that we need to take affirmative steps to affect positive change. None of this happens on its own. We need to make the change happen. We need to think about our distractions and talk about our distractions and talk about solving problems in a different way. Nobody's going to do it for us. We need to look in the mirror every day. You're not going to see this, but you have to be able to ask yourself, what did I do right today? What did I do not so well? What did I do well? What did I not do well? How do I replicate what I did well? And how do I avoid what I did wrong? Because I believe that self-perception and being honest with yourself in the mirror is key to personal and professional growth. And this is my next to last slide. This is my website. If any of you would like to get the digital summary, you're certainly welcome to contact me. Those are my 2 books that I've written, Visual Intelligence and Fixed. And I have this 3rd book coming out in October, and this is a young adult adaptation of visual intelligence. It's called Smart, Use Your Eyes to Boost Your Brain. That's where I am on social media. But more importantly, I wanted to give you a visual illustration of looking at your work and your world before and after the art of perception. And I'm showing you 2 portraits by the artist Chuck Close. For those of you who are not familiar with Chuck Close and his work, he's a portrait painter, an American portrait painter of the 20th and 21st centuries. He was paralyzed from the shoulders down. He had minimal use of his fingers, and he painted with a brush in his mouth. And the portrait that you see on the left is Chuck's portrait done in 2005. And I envision that's how you saw your world before the art of perception, a bald white man with green eyes, round glasses, and a goatee, and a t-shirt looking right out at you. But I hope that after our short session together tonight, you'll see your world more like Chuck's portrait done 6 years later. He broke down every quadrant of information, and he made it more colorful, more complex, more compelling. He lowered his glasses to get the big picture and not the small details. And I believe that if you incorporate some of the things that we talked about tonight, the 4 A's, shifting your perspective, thinking about how you frame your questions, your sense of critical inquiry, making small changes, I think it makes you a sharper professional and someone who's able to focus more and be able to drown out some of the distractions that get in our way from engaging in the world. And the last slide that I want to leave you with before I'm happy to take any of your questions, and I hope you'll understand why I want to leave you with this slide, is this one. It's evening for me here in New York, but I love the view of the barn at night. And I hope that you will leave this session with just a little slice of your day cut out to think about letting light into your life and into your work and into your problem to help you see things in a different way. So I want to thank all of you for joining me this evening, or today, sorry, it's evening for me. So thank you so much for joining me, and for any of you who've read the book. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I hope that you've enjoyed this glimpse into my world of how I use works of art to think about how we see our world. So thank you very, very, very much, and I can hand it back to Patty now. And would you like me to stop sharing, or we can just take the questions here? Whatever's easiest for you.
Yeah, I think we can leave the beautiful image of the barn at sunset over there. That's a very nice.
I
Wow.
thought it was a perfect ending, even though it's not time for you.
Wow, thank you so much, Amy. That was very eye-opening, and I think as we can see from all the comments coming in the chat box, that everyone
It's so lovely. Thank you all for the nice comments. How lovely to see.
right. Okay. Well, we've got some questions, Amy.
Sure.
That we can take. Okay, maybe we can just start with one. We've got a question here, asking how we can sort of practice better seeing in our everyday lives. Like if we don't have, time to, let's say, go down to an art museum or an art gallery and practice seeing
Absolutely.
that way, how do we do it in our everyday lives?
I can give you a perfect example. And one of the things that I try to instill in the people that take the art of perception and read the book is every day I want you to look for one thing that you didn't see the day before. I want you to consciously, if we all go to work every day or we all take our kids to school, you go from point A to point B. And every day I want you to think about seeing something that you didn't see the day before. And what happens is you're training your brain in neuroplasticity. You're asking your brain to go from this, to look just a little bit broader. And what happens is after doing that for a while, your brain will begin to do it automatically, and you'll begin to be able to see more broadly and change your lenses. And one other thing I'm going to add to that is ask yourself at the end of the day, not just what did I see, but what didn't I see today? What didn't happen that I expected to happen? So that's what I tell people. Look for one new thing every day that you didn't see the day before.
That's brilliant. Well, actually touching more a bit on this concept of using that neuroplasticity to sort of like train your brain to see in new ways.
Yes.
How does I have a question here about, you maybe can explain a bit more, how does art do that? What is it about art that helps to better train our observational skills?
Well, I have two answers, and I can't take credit for them because my colleagues have actually, some of my colleagues that I've worked with have told me about this. First of all, when we look at works of art, our brain responds to looking at works of art in a way that it doesn't to any other stimuli. The way our brain responds to music or dance. When we're looking at works of art, if you saw the presentation tonight, did you notice that you're just looking at the screen because there were no other distractions? It was just the work of art. And it forces your eyes and your brain to work in a way that they don't work together in any other way. So you're engaging in a kind of neuroplasticity. And the other thing I love about this concept of neuroplasticity, as one of my intelligence colleagues says, and this goes to the problem-solving ability, he said that neurons that fire together wire together. So when you're looking at a work of art, your neurons are firing together. And my hope is that when you're facing a problem that you don't quite know how to solve, that you can bring those neurons together again and think, well, we looked at works of art, we thought about the problems inherent in looking at the works of art. Maybe I can call on those neurons again to help solve the problem at hand. And so by looking at works of art, it's really just a vehicle, because I'm not teaching art per se. I'm not teaching Manet versus Monet. I'm teaching how to focus your eyes on what it is that you're looking at. And so that's how we can engage in this neuroplasticity, by looking for something new every day and thinking about how our brain comes together, and looking at art can help us in many other different circumstances.
Wow. Okay. Okay. So this brings me to my next question then, about looking at works of art. Sometimes when we go into an art gallery or an art museum, and we don't know exactly what we're looking at, or
Yes.
is there like a certain amount of time we should look at a piece of art before we can sort of hone this skill of seeing?
Sure. I'm going to give you the easiest way to do this. And this is how, when my son was growing up, and whenever I work with kids or young adults, or even my adult audiences, when you walk into a gallery in a museum for the first time, before you read the label, look around the room and see what captures your attention first. Ask yourself, if I could take one piece of art home in this room, which one would it be? Go. to the work that draws your attention and just spend a few minutes with it and ask yourself, why am I drawn to this work of art? Is it the colors? Is it the shapes? Does it remind me of something in my home? Is it a season? Is it something that I love? And you begin to understand what you're looking at and why you respond a certain way. And by doing that, again, you're using neuroplasticity, but you're really leveraging the idea of looking at something, focusing, and trying to drown out distractions because you're concentrating on what you're enjoying looking at. So I always tell people, go to the works of art that you're drawn to, spend a few minutes, and here's the key, before you read the label. It's not aren't important, but let's just think about our own inherent sense of observation before we read the label, and it tells us what to look for.
I see. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, it makes it a little bit easier. There's another question related to this. What if you're looking at something that you're not immediately drawn to and that you don't immediately resonate with? Like, what is there something that you can tell yourself about that as well? Is there something you can draw from that too?
Yes, I ask myself the opposite question. If I'm actually repelled by a work of art, and we don't love everything we look at, we certainly don't. I ask myself, why do I hate this so much? I see what kind of response it brings out in me. And I'll be very candid. I'm not going to spend a lot of time with it. I like to spend time with works of art that not only I like to look at, but also things that bring out responses in me to better understand myself. Because let's face it, we all meet people we can't stand. You know how you meet somebody for the first time and for an inexplicable reason, you just can't stand them? Yeah. Well, let's use that as an opportunity to learn more about ourselves. What about that person, what that brings out that reaction in me, and let's use art as a way to do that. And I'm certainly not advocating spending time with art that you don't like. That's not fun for anybody. But if a particular painting really, or a photograph really repels you, just say to yourself, what is it about that? And in the process, you'll learn more about yourself. Art teaches us a lot, not only about our own responses, but also what captivates us and what makes us think the way we do.
That's very true. Yeah. Okay. Now moving on to some questions about seeing the potential in people versus seeing ideas in people. There's a question here that says, I think I get confused between seeing potential versus seeing ideas in people. Is the former about seeing others as they are and the latter seeing others as we are?
I think that question is going to, and forgive me if it's not, but I'm reading, what I'm hearing from that question is the idea of bias. When we see potential in certain people, are we acting a certain way because we see things and then we act on them? And the answer is yes. We all are subject to our own biases. And one of the things that we want to do in the age of distraction is, before we jump to a conclusion about a person and their potential or none of their potential, is to step back and ask ourselves, just like with the painting, why am I reacting to them this way? And are the attributes that I'm ascribing to them, is it fair? Is it based on my observations, or is it based upon my biases? And do I need to step back and look at the bigger picture? Do I need to ask them questions? Do I need to engage before I reach some conclusion? So seeing perception and how we act on it, I can't change anybody's biases, nor would I want to. I just want to make people aware of their own biases, if that makes sense. And I'm not sure that answers the question, but.
No, I think it does. And actually kind of like brings us to this next question. Because I think in your line of work, you've trained, all sorts of people. And someone here asks how this point that you just touched on, were there any anecdotes of how, when working with police officers or law officers, how they have used this? Any specific examples, reflecting on their own biases and all that thing, to how it affects their own way of thinking?
Sure. Two examples that I can give you. One of them is, I'll never forget that two officers were telling me that they were in a police car and they got a call about a shooting. And they heard on the radio where the shooting was, what the neighborhood was, how many people were injured. And in their heads, before they even got to the crime scene, they had already formulated a picture in their head of what they were going to find, because they were experienced police officers and they had dealt with many shootings. And that's what's called confirmation bias. What happens is you tell your brain says, I know what I'm going to find when I get there, and you're going to look for what your brain wants to see. But when you use your visual intelligence, you try to wipe that slate clean just for a few minutes, because if you go in with confirmation bias, you're going to miss what you really need to find. And the other thing that's happened in law enforcement that law enforcement professionals have told me is they check their words at the door. Instead of saying the suspect was wearing a blue shirt, they're going to say the suspect was wearing a sweatshirt with a hood that was navy blue and seemed to have 2 pockets in the front. Because a blue shirt could be 20 different things. So what they're learning is that their words matter, specificity of words matter, and that people are relying on the words that they use. And they need to know, especially police officers and homicide investigators, need to know what they want to say and what they don't want to say, because people are relying on them. So I just had a group of detectives yesterday. I had 16 detectives here at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and they said that the program helps them rethink their situational awareness. Where are they here, now, and how would they communicate to somebody where they are, what's around them, and what is the next thing to do? So a lot of it comes down to not just observation and perception, but how do we communicate those observations and perceptions?
Ah, wow, that's very interesting. Very cool to hear. Okay, a little bit related to this question as well, right? So in your travels and talks worldwide, out of all the cultural differences that you've seen, were there any specific examples that stood out to you pertaining to, differences in perception in different cultures in the different places that you've traveled to?
Yes, absolutely. It's actually one of the greatest honors and privileges of the work that I do, is that I get to travel the globe and I work with all different people in different cultures and different industries and organizations. And I'm really privy to seeing how differently people see things, and especially problems. And the one thing that struck me was an artistic process in Japan that is called kintsugi. And what kintsugi is when Japanese ceramicists make their bowls and their pottery, it's inevitable that some of those pieces are going to come out asymmetrical or cracked or imperfect. And instead of throwing that flawed pottery away, what these Japanese ceramicists do is they fill in the cracks with gold and silver and platinum lacquer, and these objects become more precious and valuable than had they been perfect in the first place. And the reason I find it so interesting is Japanese culture strives so hard for perfection, and yet in this beautiful work of art, they will not only live with imperfection, but celebrate it and make it beautiful. And the idea of solving problems, I think we all need to practice kintsugi, and it's not an aesthetic that's shared around the world. So I love to see how different cultures handle mistakes and things that have gone wrong. And it really is very different in the different cultures in which I work.
Beautiful. Yes. If all of you haven't seen kintsugi, you can check
It's
that out.
spectacular. I wish I had a slide of it tonight. I'm sorry I didn't.
They're all very beautiful, kintsugi. Yes. Actually, okay. So now we have a question that's a little bit more specific to one of our viewers today. This is I would like to share what I've learned today with a group of children above 10 years old. I noticed the pandemic has affected them in a world that may be hurting due to not getting along with their peers or encountering bullying in school. Are there any pieces of art that I could use to help them perceive their thoughts properly while managing their emotions?
It's a great question. It's such a good question. And please know that I'm not trying to sell books, but it's one of the topics that I deal with in this book because it's aimed for 10 to 14-year-olds. And the goal of this book is to help students 3 steps to how to see, how to think about what they see, and how to talk about what they see. And the reason I bring that up is because the book is filled with works of art, but you could use any work of art to ask a group of children. There are no wrong answers. There are no right and wrong answers when we're looking at works of art. So one student can't make fun of another. Each child, if we say to them, each of you is going to see this work of art differently, and we have to respect each other for what we see. it lays the groundwork and gives them a template for respect of how other students are going to see other issues. And so this idea of using art to think about how we see, how we think about what we see and how we talk about what we see gives them this model to say, well, if someone's bullying me or bullying someone I know, let me make sure that I can articulate what it is that I see to the right person. And so the whole approach to this book is exactly the issue that you raised. How can we use art to help students, because the book is coming out after the pandemic, rethink how they talk about what they see, because there have been so many issues that they've been faced with. So the book is for teachers, but also to use with students to not just think about art on the wall and who is Vincent van Gogh, but how do we see the paintings that he did and how can we talk about them as they relate to our own lives? I hope that helps.
Wonderful. We're looking forward to that book, and hopefully we can get that into our libraries soon too.
I hope so. I hope so.
Okay, we got a question here related to other senses apart from seeing, because we perceive things not just with our eyes as well. And some people are not just visual learners, right? They're auditory or kinesthetic learners. Have you had any experiences with someone who just can't see as quickly or as not as keen visually as others? And how do you sort of help them around that?
It's a very good question. And it goes to the premise that not only do no two people see anything the same way, but some people have better observation skills than others. Some people are more insightful. But one of the things I love about teaching this program is there are no right and wrong answers. If you see something in a work of art, I can't tell you what you see. And the example that I'm going to give you is when I worked at the Frick Collection, I had a group of 10-year-olds in the gallery, and we were looking at a painting by Rembrandt. And as I was showing the painting to these 10-year-old students, the chief curator walked in. He was not fond of students, as you might imagine. And I remember saying to this young girl, well, what do you see in the picture? And she said, the man in the painting has pink in his beard, the color pink. And I said, oh, that's very interesting. I didn't notice that. Well, later the chief curator called me to his office, and in a very stern voice, he said, there is no pink in Rembrandt. And I said to him, I can't tell a child what she sees in a painting. She sees pink. Her eyes may be in such a way that she sees pink. I can't tell her. I can say to her, well, I don't know if Rembrandt painted in pink. How interesting that you see it that way. Art gives us this opportunity to explore what everybody sees. And by being able to communicate what we see with each other, what's music to my ears is when a person will say out loud, you know, I would have never thought of that. I would have never thought of that. It shows you that multiple perspectives make for better decision and more informed decision making. So we can use art as the great leveler. We don't need to know anything about it to be able to see things in it together, and for us to grow from the experience of looking together to see what other people see, and to reconcile, not that one looks better than another, but how can we share those insights so we all come away seeing more broadly.
Wonderful. Thank you for that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, but moving on a little bit to more about this age of distraction that we're living in. As you said before, we're right now living in an age where there's a lot of information overload. We're bombarded with a lot of visual chaos. Is there anything we can do to consciously train our eyes to, selectively look at things around us to sort of filter out all these distractions?
Yes, the title of my presentation is See What Matters Now. And it's really easier said than done. But the term visual intelligence, which is the title of my book, means two things. It means to see what matters. How do we drown out the noise? And how do we see what other people don't? And I may be in the minority here, but when it comes to distractions, I don't believe that we should shut down our world to distractions. I believe that we should be incorporating some of those distractions into our method of looking, because the world is full of distractions. And what's the number one distraction in our lives? Phones. Everyone's on a phone all the time. And you know what? phones aren't going to go away. So if we make ourselves aware of the distractions and say, we know they're out there, but this is what I want to look at this morning, and give yourself reasonable deadlines and say, I do it all the time. If I go into a museum and I say, I'm going to spend 20 to 25 minutes without taking my phone out of my bag, I know the distractions in there. I know the emails are coming in, but let me put it away and focus my eyes for a limited amount of time, bite size. Nobody can give up their phone for a whole day. But to think about our distractions and put parameters around them in small digestible bits, and then we can work it into our routines. Because there's going to be noise every day. We have to listen to the noise, and we have to know how to contain the noise in a way that's reasonable and acceptable for each of us. So by going into a museum and saying, I'm not going to look at my phone or answer a text or an email for 20 minutes, I can clean the slate, I can clean my mind, look at some works of art, and then I feel better going back to the distraction. Seeing what matters means very individualistically thinking about those distractions in a different way.
I think that's very true. Like, it's sort of like taking back control from, instead of being controlled by all these distractions, and remembering that, you're the owner of the phone does not own you, right?
That's exactly right. And it's empowering to say, I'm going to take control of this distraction. As I said, even if it's in a bite-sized piece for 20 minutes a day, you can say, you know what, I'm just going to turn it off. Nothing's going to happen in 20 minutes. And then you start fresh. And it gives you an ability to see things with a clearer mind, and I hope with clearer lenses.
Brilliant.
Thank you.
Okay, I think amongst our audience today, we have some people who are educators or caregivers. So there's some questions here about specific works of art that you know of to help teach perception to both children with low literacy and maybe adults and individuals on the autistic spectrum.
Yeah. I think that while I don't have specific education in teaching people on the spectrum, I find that photography is a wonderful art form to use. Because sometimes when you simplify the images either into black and white, or you're not dealing with abstract art to begin with, it gives everyone a good starting place. And I always, in my presentations, I start with representational art and I move up to abstract art, because very few people are comfortable just diving in or feeling conversant about looking at abstract art. So we look at portraits and landscapes and photographs with identifiable things. It gives people a level of comfort to say, well, I see a farm and 3 baskets of apples and it's a sunny day. Simple, straightforward. And then we make the art more complex, and it's empowering to say, well, you saw this in this painting. How is it similar or different to this painting? And making reference back and forth from works of art that you've seen before not only engages in that neuroplasticity, but it broadens our lens in a compare and contrast way. So I always start with representational works of art and photography and make things more complex from there, always remembering to stick with things that people like. If someone is on the spectrum and they have a negative reaction to a work of art, don't use it. There are thousands of others to choose from, and don't dig your heels in and say, well, we're going to look at this whether you want to or not. Move on to something else.
That's brilliant. And it's good that you touched on the topic of photography as well, because I think we have some photography enthusiasts in our audience today. And someone was asking if, looking at photography gives the same effect as looking at works of art. And I think you've answered that as well.
Absolutely. I'm a huge fan of photography. I love using it. I love using it in my presentation. And you can see, I hope that those photographs of the barn were as effective as looking at a painting. They're stunning. See the art and to see the photograph of the work of art, I think is exceedingly effective. And I love photography. I celebrate it and I try to use it whenever I can.
Right. Actually, we have a question here from a photographer.
Right.
This person says they are also a writer and researcher, and in a way they've had some practice in observing and asking questions, but right now they have a problem with asking too many questions.
Yes.
and they get too frazzled sometimes. So
Yep.
they're sort of curious to how you handle that.
Now, I want to clarify, is it about people who ask too many questions, or is it the person who's asking the questions who has too many questions?
I think it's the person who's asking too many questions. Like when you sort
The
of like,
person,
open your eyes and you start observing all sorts of things right now and
right,
seeing things from different
right.
angles and perspectives. And now you're like wondering about all these sorts of things. Yes.
Mhm. I'm going to refer back to one of the earliest points in my presentation about the power of the pause. When you're overwhelmed with information and you want to get as much information as you can, you need to pause and you need to prioritize. What do I need to know here? What do I want to know? What's most important? And frequently, one of the models that I didn't get to talk about tonight is something I've learned from the intelligence community, to ask 3 basic questions of a new situation. What do I know? What don't I know? And if I have the opportunity to get more information, what do I need to know? So it's what do I know? What don't I know? And if I had the opportunity to get more information, what do I need to know? And by breaking it into those 3 buckets, those 3 pieces, we can throw a lot of our questions into those 3 sections. And I find it's a good way to organize information when we need more information and we don't have it. So that's the model that I use when we're overwhelmed by so many questions and so much information that we need, is to be able to ask those 3 questions. What do I know? What don't I know? And if I had the opportunity to get more information, what do I need to know?
That's a great tip. So I hope the person who asked that question, you can
I hope they heard it.
yeah, hopefully that's helpful to you. But I think that's a great tip. Yes. And it's not just for, it's very useful for all of us in whatever task we do every day, right? Because like you said.
And in fact, before we even dive into something, ask ourselves, before we come running, charging in, I need to know this, and this, ask yourself first, what do I have? What don't I have? And if I had the opportunity to get one more piece of information, what do I need to know?
Yeah, I love that. And the power of the pause as well. That's true.
Oh, I tell myself every day, just pause, deep breath, don't say a word. And we all come out better from pausing. We really do.
Okay. Okay, I think we're sort of running out of time. So I'm sorry we can't get through all the questions. Okay, maybe, well, there's one question asking about your shelves, just like how we fill up your bookshelves.
I can close with a comment about my bookshelves. And before I tell you about that, I just want to thank all of you for giving me your time, sharing your time with me today. I've learned in this pandemic that time is the most precious commodity. And so I really am very grateful that you all took the time. I will tell you about my bookshelves. I'm going to stand aside. They are color coordinated very purposefully. This is not a fake backdrop. This is my living room. One of my dearest friends in the world is a devotee of feng shui, and she believes that there needs to be harmony in the atmosphere in which you live. And in my old apartment, she, as a gift to me, arranged all my books color coordinated. And I said, that's ridiculous. I'm not going to color coordinate my books. Well, I loved it so much, and it brought such a sense of peace and centering to my world, especially when things were unorganized, that when I moved, I packed up those books color coordinated and I rearranged them myself. And I have 2 more on the other side that are also arranged this way. And it gives me a grounding, especially during pandemic when I was working remotely, that having my books organized this way is grounding and gives me great solace. And I love my books. They're a big part of my life. And to have them organized this way, visually, it makes sense because I'm really indebted to my friend who arranged them according to the tenets of feng shui, but I just love them that they're color coordinated. So, yep, you noticed. Good for you for noticing the books.
Thank you so much. We have now come to the end of the session and the 2022 edition of Reading in the Age of Distraction. We hope you feel equipped to build a habit of focus reading and focus in your everyday life. Thank you so much, everybody. We hope to see you again soon.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye, Amy. Take care.
Bye, thank you.